Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Whitney Purdom. I'm the secretary of the American Friends of SOAS board and a fellow SOAS alumni. I'm so excited to introduce our guest for today's webinar, Brandolon Barnett. Brandolon is a fellow SOAS alumni. He graduated with a master's in international studies in 2012. And last year, he published his first book called Dreams Deferred, which chronicles his personal experience entering into and working in the social impact space, which we're going to discuss today. Brandolon has held several positions in the social impact and philanthropy space. He's currently the Chief Product Officer for Deed, which helps companies form their environmental, social, and governance efforts. And he also leads Democratize Ventures, which is an initiative that supports and advises entrepreneurs of color in DC and New York here in the States. And he's also serving as an elected ANC official in DC, where he currently resides. And we have the pleasure of having Rachael Myrow lead our discussion with Brandolon today. Rachael is a seasoned reporter and interviewer and is currently senior editor at KQED's Silicon Valley News Desk. Thank you, Rachael, for being with us here today. And thank you so much, Brandolon. I'm really excited for this conversation, so I'll let you both take it away. But if anybody has any questions, we're going to have a Q&A session at 10 minutes till the end of the hour. So please put your questions in the chat box and we'll get to them at that point. Yeah, really looking forward to this conversation, and I'll let you guys take it away. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Whitney. And hello, Brandolon. What a pleasure to talk with you. I have been so much enjoying your book, Dreams Deferred. If y'all haven't had a chance to read it, run out today or, click online. It's such an affecting first-person account of trying to rise up in Silicon Valley in a world that is not designed to embrace people who are coming from childhoods of hardship. Brandolon, I'm wondering, you have at this point a fairly long and extensive career in companies like Salesforce and fields like angel investing. What made you think, I need to tell my story in book form?
Thank you, Rachael, and thanks, Whitney, also for the introduction. And I'm so honored. I loved my time at SOAS. It was so transformative. So I'm so honored to be able to speak to people and get the word out about the book and all the things I'm working on to folks I know are committed to changing the world, as a lot of folks at SOAS are. And to your question, Rachael, I wrote the book, I think, for two reasons. One was we were going into COVID-19, and I had been thinking for a few years that, some of the experiences I recount in the book, especially some of the times where I thought about ending my life because I couldn't see a path forward. And I thought, wow, as I looked around the world, there are a lot of people going into COVID who are feeling isolated, who are feeling alone, who are losing their jobs, who are losing their dreams, who are losing loved ones, and having similar experiences to what I went through during the Great Recession from around 2008 to 2011, 2012, really. And I thought, if I can write my story, maybe if even just one person out there reads it and decides to keep going, that there is some hope for something better, that would make the effort worth it. And so that was one of my motivations. The other was that I wanted to start and be part of some ongoing conversations around why is it so hard for certain people to do work in the social impact space. So for me, looking on my journey, applying to hundreds of jobs, going to SOAS, one of the world's best universities, as I've used my education throughout my career, I've been, consistent in my belief that it is just an incredible institution from which I've learned so much. And so I wrote it to begin that conversation or be part of that conversation around why is it so difficult for us, for so many people, as you say, of limited means, to be involved in conversations around how can we be part of charitable work? How can we work at foundations? How can we work in philanthropy? How can we be part of some of the technologies being developed in Silicon Valley that are being built to make the world a better place, but oftentimes with limited voices and limited perspectives involved in the creation of those products, those initiatives. And so those were the real big motivating factors for me.
You know, I've been so taken with some of your ideas that are so salient at this point in time, given the political moment. And that's something I want to get to in just a moment. But, you know, a couple of the questions that you often ask are, who are you investing in? What are you investing in? And who's in the room while you're making those decisions?
Yeah. And for me, it's, you know, what I've been saying in a lot of my conversations and interviews is, imagine someone comes into your community and, you know, let's say it's a small rural community, just as an example. And they say, maybe it's an institution, maybe it's a foundation, maybe it's a company that's starting a new initiative there, or it's building a new factory or a new plant. And oftentimes what happens is they'll come into that community and they'll say, you know, we're going to change your community. We're going to change the lives of the people that live here. And just imagine being in that situation and looking around and seeing, well, no one from my town is on the board of that organization. No one is a decision maker in the decisions that that institution is making. How can you come into a community or come into an environment and say, we're going to change it, make it better or worse, without fully understanding it or having representation from the people that live in that community? And so that kind of thinking comes naturally when we think of a scenario like a small rural community, right? Or something that we're familiar with. But when we think about big technology, when we think about multilateral institutions, when we think about big technology creating products to quote unquote change the world, and when we think about corporate responsibility teams devising initiatives funded by millions of dollars or foundations with millions of dollars in funding and backing, and then we think about their goals, they want to change the world. Well, we all live in the world. How can you possibly do that work effectively without diverse voices? So when I now lead a product team, and we're trying to build products for social impact. DEED is an employee engagement platform. So, and I can talk a little bit more about that work, but we want to make ESG engaging and inclusive as that movement grows.
Well, I'm going to stop you there.
And,
ESG,
go ahead.
who are unfamiliar with it?
Yes. ESG stands for environmental social governance. And so I could go on and on. This has become a passion for mine. Like when I got out of, this is where kind of my career has taken me. So when I first began my journey that I recount in the book, I was obsessed with jobs in the social, what you might call the social impact space. So that's charities, philanthropy, non-governmental organizations, or NGOs. I really wanted to do that work. And I wanted to do it for a variety of reasons. Some of those reasons include me being a massive nerd. And so I grew up loving Star Trek and science fiction. And I wanted to be part of the process of developing communities and creating a better world, more like the ones, not like the one I saw in the community I grew up in, where my mother was crying because she was a single mom who couldn't afford to pay bills or get access to resources, or sometimes we didn't have food, but the worlds that I aspire to. So I wanted to be part of making the real world more like those things that we dream about and write about and aspire to in our fiction. And what I discovered, to the point I made earlier, was that it was just very hard to break into those spaces. It was almost impossible. And so along the way, I discovered that there was this whole movement called corporate responsibility at the time, and that name still exists. You can kind of find more information about it if you Google, say, corporate social responsibility or corporate sustainability, and read some of the reports that companies are now putting out with regularity. But at the time, 10 or 12 years ago, it was a little bit more rare. And I discovered all of these companies doing work to make the world a better place through their grant making, through engaging employees with causes, through thinking more about their anti-corruption policies, so how they govern themselves and how could they be more sustainable in how they build their products, or how they operate with respect to the environment, how they treat their employees in terms of well-being. Those conversations over time have evolved into a field that has a set of practices that you might think of as corporate responsibility, or corporate sustainability, but are increasingly being measured under frameworks that call themselves environmental social governance frameworks, or ESG frameworks. And so those frameworks require, in some cases, companies to report on all of those things I just mentioned. How much did you donate to charity? How much, which charities did you partner with? What steps have you taken to support the well-being of your employees? So that could be metrics like, How many safety incidents were there? It includes things like their carbon footprint and what are you doing to reduce the impacts, the negative impacts you're having on the environment, that whether that's through how your staff travels, et cetera. So that's ESG. And I do get kind of, I am in the weeds a lot. So I'm glad you called that out.
Well, it's interesting. ESG is such an interesting question, right? You can't improve what you don't measure, and outsiders can't call you to account if you're failing, but they can't see how that you're failing. And there are so many different ways you can fail. And I just think it's so interesting, though, that we have seen during this pandemic, the last 2 years, Black Lives Matter protests have been raising consciousness effectively across the country. Organizations of every stripe, big, small, on the left coast, on the right coast, like everyone now understands that they have to say, at least in the press release, oh, this is a value for us. Diversity is a value for us.
Yes.
But execution, the rollout, that's where the devil is in the details. And we see so many organizations that, may know how to spin what they're doing so that they look good with their ESG, but may not be actually doing the work in the right way behind the scenes.
Yes, exactly. So throughout my career at Salesforce, this was a big focus for me. And now at Deed, I'm working to build technologies that make all of that a little bit easier, but it is one of my concerns when it comes to that broader movement. When you put measurement at the center, I mean, I'll put it this way. I said kind of wryly to a colleague a few months ago, I was like, accounting never changed the world. Like when you put accounting at the center and someone has a vested interest in getting something done and they don't know best practices, they'll fudge the numbers to get to the conclusion that they want to present to the public or to whatever that stakeholder is who's seeing those numbers. So I think that's a real risk. But at the same time, I think there's a big opportunity with that. And what attracted me to this space, as I was going through my own journey, was that it was still kind of up in the air. What were best practices? What did it mean for a company to engage in social impact? And I'm so fortunate that I've been able to be part of conversations, kind of driving that evolution. But I became really just enamored with the idea that I could see myself doing work and impact in this small set of organizations and spaces, or I could change my whole perception of what it means to have impact and where it can happen. And do it within a corporate setting, do it through technologies, do it in whatever way fit my skills and my passions, and still make an impact on the world. And so that's how I arrived in this space. And I try not to drink the Kool-Aid, but I do think there's a lot of potential and a lot of opportunity to just think differently about how we want to make the world better. It's not just traditional charity, traditional philanthropy, traditional NGO work, but this whole idea of ESG, corporate responsibility, and social impact more broadly, even including things like impact investing, which is the idea of I want to think about the impact when I make an investment with my dollars, whether that's through a company investment program or through my own investments. All of those things bring impact into everyday life. And so that's kind of where I've landed in my career.
I do want to talk about the fact that you were at Salesforce, which is, it's kind of an industry outlier in Silicon Valley because there are so few companies that seem to walk the walk when it comes to thinking about community near as well as far, thinking about corporate responsibility in non-ironic terms. Yeah. Do you think that that's a function of the example set by Mark Benioff, or is it more a function of sort of a company culture that has been consciously cultivated, or is it both?
I think that it is a little bit of both, but over time, mostly the latter. So definitely credit to Mark Benioff and to folks like Suzanne DiBianca and Rob Acker, who led Salesforce, or who leads Salesforce.org. From the beginning, there was what was called the 1-1-1 model and pledge 1%. And even when the company was just a few dozen employees, there was this thought of how do we take 1% of profit 1% of our staff's time, and 1% of the value of our products, and give that back to the world. And then also over time, think about how our products can be used to drive impact. And that was the next evolution of Salesforce.org, which became a model. Now you look across Silicon Valley and you've got Twilio.org, and you've got all of these different .orgs that have spun up, all inspired in large part by the work that Salesforce did. But then I would say over time, having been in Salesforce, that attracted a lot of people with a passion for creating a culture that was true to its values and holding it accountable. And so that has become the driving force. There are people in Salesforce, and I was one of them until just a few weeks ago, mocking up products that would change the way that nonprofits manage their data and use their data to engage in their programs or to raise more funds for the work that they do. Things that would blow your mind. And that all comes from the bottom up, from employees saying, what if we did this? And creating that culture is really essential. And then it ends up being a tool for accountability. And you'll see, I think just yesterday, Salesforce announced that they are joining a growing cadre of companies that are, I don't know if cadre is the right word, is that like a negative? I'm gonna go with a growing community of companies who are tying executive compensation, for example, to those ESG metrics that I mentioned. So definitely, I think for any company, if you wanna do it right, it's gotta be a little bit of both. Because you do have to have buy-in from leadership to even allow employees to take that volunteer time off. Because you can have a policy that we're going to let people go volunteer and connect to community. But if leadership isn't living those values, then no one's going to comply. People are just going to feel like they have to go to work. And then you're building a workforce that's not connected to purpose. And we know that that has negative connotations and negative benefits when you're trying to attract and retain talent. But you also need to have employees and people, customers, who recognize those values, who see leaders living them and then repeating them in conversations, and then want to bring their own passions to the table. Whether that's by starting employee resource groups. Salesforce has an abundance of amazing groups of LGBT employees or African-American employees, APAC employees, who band together to support causes that are uniquely important to them. And so you have to have a bottoms-up approach as well.
And as you say, it's something, you know, employees, current and also prospective, take notice. They see whether that kind of conscious culture is encouraged or, you know, shut down by CEOs and HR departments that don't really want it.
Yes, and I would say not only do we see that, do we see that now, but it's more prominent. COVID-19 accelerated that. I mean, who after the last 2 years that we've all lived through can think that being disconnected from others, being disconnected from community, being disconnected from a sense of purpose, and just going to work for work's sake, commuting for commuting's sake, all of those things now come with a demand that there's some broader purpose behind what we're all engaging in. And so it's even more important, I think, in a post-COVID world to think about how all the work that we do can be infused with purpose wherever possible, to connect us to each other. So I think COVID has accelerated all that tremendously.
You know, I'm wondering if we can talk about diversity, just because it's something I've certainly covered for KQED. It strikes me that you know, most corporate leadership in America, in Silicon Valley and beyond, they've gotten the memo. You can't just have one person of color, you know, in a room where decisions are being made, because, you know, you don't have critical mass. And invariably, if somebody's feeling isolated for any reason, in a room where decisions are made, they're not going to stay in that room for very long, right? There's it doesn't feel comfortable. You can, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this one out. But then rolling forward and changing the way that hiring happens, changing the way that retention happens, that seems to have been, you know, the heavier lift for a lot of companies.
Yeah, and you know, the best story I have encountered about that helps me to capture and communicate the importance of diversity and you know, diverse voices in decision making is when I was on the advisory board for a small nonprofit / operating foundation in the community I grew up in, which is in Oak Cliff, community of color in Dallas, Texas, and a long way from London. And what I remember distinctly is I missed a couple of meetings. I was young, but I was trying to be connected. So this is just an advisory board. I come back to the advisory board, and myself and the only other person of color on this board had grown up in that community, both had single moms, and everyone else in the room was very excited about an initiative they'd been discussing the past 2 meetings that was going to provide fresh food and fresh vegetables to mothers in the community. That sounds fantastic, right? But myself and the other person who'd grown up in that community, which is, and I think that's important to note, because diversity of voices means racial diversity. It also means other kinds of diversity. It means
economic diversity, yeah.
Yep. And so we're sitting there and I'm thinking, I grew up here, like many other people in this community today, single mom who's going to work, she's super busy. I know for a fact that whenever we bought fresh vegetables, as great as that sounds on paper, my mom did not have the time to cook them before they went bad. So when I hear this conversation, I'm able to bring to that conversation to the table a voice that's saying, hold on a second, why aren't we thinking about frozen vegetables as part of this initiative or as the entirety of this initiative in light of the circumstances that people face in this community? And okay, if you're saying there's a nutritional trade-off, there's actually not a lot of data on that, but sure, let's have that conversation. But does that outweigh us just giving fresh vegetables to overworked single mothers in this community and it just rots? I mean, there's no nutritional value in a rotted vegetable. So that's how diversity helps you build better. Whether you're building a product, whether you're building a community, whether you're building a social impact initiative, whether you're building a company, diversity is important to actually be able to bring the perspectives to the table that help you spot the gaps in kind of groupthink that can develop when you don't have diverse voices and when everybody's on exactly the same page and no one questions kind of what the next step is from here. So I think diversity, it needs to be, and what I've seen as a trend and what my company responds to is this idea that diversity, it needs to be something that everyone thinks about. We had a phase of corporate responsibility and ESG where it was a particular stakeholder within the company. So it might be the head of sustainability thinking about the environment. And then you might hire a diversity and inclusion vice president to think about DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion. That time needs to go away. I think it is naturally going away, but what we need instead is for every manager, every person who's hiring to think about the diversity of their team in a way that's productive and equitable. And what we need is for every person working in a company or doing a job to think about, is it sustainable for me? Do I need to take this flight or can I do this work virtually? And that's kind of where I think the world is going. And it's been one of the things I want to push because it's also in line with my story, to my mind, which is this idea that it took me so long to try and almost, end up homeless on the streets to be a part of a career in nonprofits and philanthropy. What if we scratched that and said instead that impact is the responsibility of everyone doing every job and helped them with the tools needed to actually act out that principle in real life and in the real world?
Let's talk a little bit about how these issues play out in the nonprofit world. I mean, you have a lot of organizations, many of which are getting by on, with Scotch tape and a prayer. And they'll say things like, look, we just don't have the salaries. We don't have the paid internships that would help us diversify the folks we have, doing the work. But the problem, of course, with that is good intentions are not enough.
That's right. And I did get a lot of experience with this issue as well. When part of my journey has been being the head of research at an organization called the Council on Foundations. It is the national association here in the United States for philanthropy. So its members include organizations like the Gates Foundation, Sloan, as well as companies that range from Blackbaud, which has a robust CSR program and builds a lot of software for social impact, but also companies like Deloitte and Accenture. And when I was there, I led research into diversity of foundations and philanthropy, which then also led me to work very closely with folks doing the same thing on the nonprofit side. It is not a flattering picture. When we think about, and let me just kind of think back to some statistics here, but only 8% of foundation CEOs or presidents are diverse leaders, and 7% of grants from foundations go to diverse communities. And when you think about nonprofits, 80% of them are not person of color led. And so, again, when I hear an organization say, there's no pool of talent for me to draw from, who am I supposed to go to? Those are excuses. A lot of times when you look across the social impact space, the work becomes too siloed, in my opinion. And you have nonprofits who are doing work that there might be an entire, amazing, massive, diverse pool of candidates that they could pull from, but those people don't even know about that organization or its work. And so that usually I hear that, and I honestly, as Whitney mentioned, my master's was international studies and diplomacy. So I try to be diplomatic, but it's hard not to roll my eyes because there are avenues to increase the diversity of your social impact organization. You just have to think about where you're sourcing candidates, who even knows about your work. And if you do that, there are some proven models that can be kind of called upon to help along the way. So usually for me, that falls on deaf ears.
I got to say, I've seen a lot of deaf ears in the world of journalism too, having these conversations, which leads to my next question. But first, I do want to encourage our audience to make use of that chat box and, get in there, start putting in your questions, start formulating them. It's okay to hit send to everyone. I'm not going to be thrown off because we do, I want to share Brandolon's expertise with the rest of you. But so let's get back to this question about deaf ears. As you say that, there are proven strategies to diversify, in terms of gender, in terms of color, and in terms of economics. And hitting on that last one, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of well-paid internships.
Yes. So this is an issue that's really near and dear to my heart. And I got really triggered about 6 months ago when I was in a conversation about the book and someone said, oh, unpaid internships, that's just, that's a first world problem. That's something that's only, relevant to people who went to college and it doesn't apply to other. And I lost it because one of the stories that I actually start my book off with is I had taken an internship in San Francisco. This is after grad school, trying to rebuild my career. My mother had passed away. I'm thinking about what's my next step? I took a job in San Francisco where you are, Rachel, one of the most, and I visited, I was there once a month during my time at Salesforce. So for years, beautiful city, one of the most expensive places I've ever been. Kind of in some ways puts London to shame. Like there's not even deals on sales at some of the stores on occasion. So I am starting my story off with one of the most seminal moments of my life, which is wandering the streets of San Francisco, trying to find enough money to get home from this unpaid internship. I literally didn't have enough money to go from San Francisco, the city, down to the South Bay where I was staying on a friend's couch. Unpaid internships are completely unacceptable. And if we think about promoting diversity in the social impact space, whether you're a nonprofit or whether you're a foundation, I think what we really need to talk about as a sector is the overlap between this conversation around overhead and this obsession with overhead in the nonprofit space, something many have talked about, and connect that to the idea of diversity in the sense that how can we promote diversity? How can we help people be exposed to careers in the social impact space, to be exposed to that work if we can't pay them well enough to take care of their families, to pay their student loans, to eat, to get home, literally to take the train or bus home from where they are going to just be in a safe place? How can we then invite those people with a straight face into this sector and into this work? And when you think about the overhead myth, I have been part of, adding my voice to calling on funders, specifically big foundations, to provide funding. When you fund a nonprofit for an initiative and you know that an intern is part of their hiring plan, provide some funding so they can pay that person. And that person can see a future for themselves in social impact work. Because it is just absolutely unacceptable, the idea that we want to make this space diverse and acceptable, and accessible rather to a wide variety of people. And that, that value, I hope that folks can see from the way I've presented it and from what others have said, is kind of undeniable, but it also becomes impractical for someone who just wants a job. So they want to do good work, but they also want to be able to take care of their family, to have a family, to maybe one day buy a home or start a business, and bring those values, right, into the businesses that they might start, into the ways that they might build wealth in their community. And so I think it's one of the most important issues, really. And it can sound like something that's only relevant to a small segment of the population, but that's because internships are unpaid. If they were paid, more people would take advantage of them and more people would be affected by that pay and by those opportunities. But there are so many people coming out of grad school. I actually wanted to work for the UN, but they only do unpaid internships. So to me, that's become one of the issues that I care deeply about. And one of the first things I said when I took my current role as Chief Product Officer was, we are paying our interns. And so I try to put my money where my mouth is as well.
I think a lot of people who may not have struggled coming up don't realize that that young person got to college and finished college because other family members sacrificed to put that person in college. And that child, in your 20s, you're still a child, I'm sorry, cannot come back to the parents and say, oh, hey, I just took an unpaid internship, or I just took a really poorly paid internship, at some struggling nonprofit because I want to do good work in the world. They're gonna meet with some very upset family members.
Yes, I did myself. When I went to graduate school in London, my mom had very little. She was hiding how ill she was becoming. So I didn't know. I'm off in London at SOAS, enjoying my time while she was deteriorating. But every month, she sent me about $100. And honestly, that's what I used to eat a lot of the times. I would walk from around Chalk Farm Station down to Russell Square for class to save money on transit. On the way back, I'd stop at a McDonald's in King's Cross or something, get the cheapest thing I could get, and go back and eat. And a lot of that came from what my mom provided. But once I was out of school, the expectation is, hey, you have a graduate degree and you have an undergraduate degree. You're supposed to be generating some income now. But of course, for me, I could have just taken any job, but I wanted a job with impact. But even so, a lot of the opportunities available to kickstart careers are unpaid internships. And exactly to your point, my mom had nothing left to give. She had already done everything in her power just to help me have that McDonald's, right? So we have to create a better paradigm if we want to bring those voices in and actually be able to engage them and have them see a future for themselves in a space that should be it should be a well-paid space. So often we kind of discount the work that happens in nonprofits and philanthropy and charity, but that's some of the most complex and important work being done on the planet to solve problems. And so even from that perspective, let's get people paid for participating in that vital social good economy.
You're literally seeding the next generation of leaders.
Yes.
So I gotta ask, how did a kid from Texas find out about SOAS in London?
I haven't been asked that question, and I haven't thought about it in a while, but I watched a documentary when I was in college, and I was growing up African-American, I always felt like, I had a culture and I was very proud of it, but that the rest of the world didn't recognize that my family, that we had a culture that was worth respecting. And so I began this process when I was an undergraduate at the University of Pittsburgh of trying to learn more about my roots. And so I started going to the school library and renting out documentaries about African American history. And then I went back and found a documentary that now the name escapes me, but it was by a man named Basil Davidson, who I learned was a professor emeritus at SOAS. And from that moment, I was like, wow, this must be a really interesting place. So throughout undergrad, I'd heard the name and I started learning more about the school. And it just sounded like a really fascinating place to be with really brilliant people. I, of course, learned about Aung San Suu Kyi, who had graduated. And then I'd always been, since the moment I learned of his work, hugely obsessed with the economist Keats, not Keats, who am I trying to name? Well, an economist who taught at LSE. And I learned then that LSE was part of the University of London and SOAS was part of the University of London. And so all of these things kind of came together in a storm for me. And I thought, that's where I want to be. I just feel like that's the place where I should be. And I at the time was working for an NGO based in Dallas, and it was the Great Recession. And I, also was thinking, what's my next step? I had been turned down from the Foreign Service. They said I had too much student loan debt after I passed all of the tests. So I was sad and thinking about what's my direction, and applied to SOAS, with all those things in the back of my mind, got in and loved every moment of it.
How did it affect your world outlook?
So for me, it was just the level of international interactions at SOAS. Everyone in my class, it felt like, was from a different country and bringing a different perspective. And that's been a big part of the conversation we've had today about how that can help you to build a better product or build a better initiative or build a better company. It helped me to build myself into a better version of myself. Just hearing some of the questions that others would ask. There were students from China, students from different parts of the EU, students from Sub-Saharan Africa and from the Middle East and from South America, and they all brought different questions. So when we would have a speaker in the class, they would ask a question, others would ask a question that never would have occurred to me just coming from America. And I think I sometimes ask questions that shocked them because they have a perspective on what it means to be an American that I don't think matched, my experiences growing up in this country, mostly in poverty. And so that was very enriching. And it always led me to just think about what other kinds of questions can I ask in this situation. I think that's one of the best skills that I got out of that experience.
You've also written about how it goes the other way around, that you left the United States, with certain preconceptions about other countries,
Yeah.
only to discover, wow, it's not like what I was thinking about at all.
Yeah. And the first international experience I had was on a program called Semester at Sea. I got a scholarship and was able to travel to 12 different countries. I'd never seen the ocean before. All of a sudden, I'm spending 4 months on a ship, traveling around the world to different countries. And I had thought there were so many things that I was exposed to. I remember one experience, for example, I was in Kowloon Park in Hong Kong. I'm about 19, 20 years old at the time on this program. And I'm just walking down the street and a gentleman was following me for what must have been at least a couple of miles, 15 to 30 minutes as I'm walking. He's on my heels. And I finally got up the courage. I'm a pretty introverted, shy person. I've learned to not be, but I got up the courage to turn around and ask him, "Hey man, why are you following me?" And he said, you seemed American and you're, African-American or you're Black and you all are rich, right? Like I want you to come to my tailor shop and buy some clothes. And I'm like, wow, where did you get this perception? And what circumstances must you be living in to kind of have come to that conclusion? It must be very different from the world that I grew up in. But I think, and then we started to have a conversation about what my life was like and what his life was like. He told me he had a couple of Black guys come into his shop, a couple of weeks before and spend thousands of dollars. And now we were his kind of target audience, and I'm sitting there like, whoa, man, I don't know if that's going to work out for you, but maybe. But it just exposed me to a different way of thinking, both about how I can reasonably think the world should look at me. Maybe the stereotypes that I kind of sometimes internalize, I can let those go. But also, my perception was that there were not people living in circumstances like mine in a place like Hong Kong. And yet there were. And I was able to learn that story. And that's where I realized just how important it is to listen, and to kind of let go of preconceived notions. And that continued with SOAS, but that's become a guiding light for me and how I like to move through the world.
So how did you end up in Washington, D.C.?
So I was in San Francisco. I was working with an organization called Universal Giving, and I was getting deeper exposure. They work with big companies to help them vet charities that they might be distributing major grants to, and to help those nonprofits that they partner with in their network to be able to get opportunities and programs in front of those companies that they might want to connect with through grants, or have their employees travel and volunteer with or make donations to. So similar work to what I support today, but at a smaller scale. And at that point, that work was unpaid. It was an internship. My mother had passed away perhaps 7 months or 8 months before, and I felt pretty hopeless. I had been applying to job after job after job after job, mostly NGO work. And I had seen this one company at the time called Truist here in DC that did very similar work. They built a technology platform that worked with companies to help them distribute grants, vet potential charity partners, encourage employees to engage and volunteer. And so I just applied. It seemed like a good fit. And it was honestly one out of the hundreds of jobs I sent in applications to. And the story I recount in my book is that, I was really at rock bottom. I was standing the day that they reached out to me for an interview. I was standing on a train platform in Santa Clara in the South Bay, right, south of San Francisco. And I thought, it's hard for me to talk about, but when I think back to why I wrote my book, it's important for me I thought about ending my life. I was, very, very, very closer than I've ever been to just jumping as this train approached. And then I heard, my mom in my head, and others who'd been there for me saying, that just keep going. And I got to my unpaid internship, and that morning I got a call saying, hey, we want to talk with you. The next day I had a second interview, the next day a third, and I didn't even have the money to fly once they gave me an offer here in DC where they were based. I didn't have the money, so I had to reach out to friends. Luckily, a couple of friends bought me a plane ticket. I arrived here, stayed in a hostel for a couple of weeks while I looked for a place to live and waited for my first paycheck. And I've been in DC ever since. It's a bit strange of a story, I think, because I was working for an NGO in San Francisco, and then I moved to DC to work for a tech company. And then I ended up at Salesforce working remotely from DC. But the products I've built all along the way, no matter where the company has been based, have been things that, are supporting things core to my values, which has become this idea of just moving resources to people who need them. So now at Deed, we help move millions of dollars and volunteer hours, expert assistance to people who need it, nonprofits and other kinds of organizations. That's what I was doing at Salesforce. I helped to design their philanthropy cloud, which was a very similar platform. I worked on Salesforce's sustainability or net zero cloud. I don't know how many folks are watching the Super Bowl, but if you saw the Matthew McConaughey commercial with the hot air balloon, hashtag Team Earth, that's the work I was doing at Salesforce, and the kinds of products I was building to manage carbon emissions. So I was part of that work for a short time. I worked with Sean Puffy Combs on a platform supporting Black entrepreneurship and through Combs Enterprises. That's called Shop Circulate. So I did all that, ended up in DC. That's how I ended up in DC. And that's kind of where my journey has taken me. And I love DC. I'm now an elected official here as of October of last year. So I'm responsible for representing about 2,000 constituents in the neighborhood of Columbia Heights, which is about a mile north of downtown DC. And I love this community in part because it gave me opportunity. I came here and was able to build a home while still having an impact.
That's something that is so hard for anybody to do in the Bay Area. So I got to ask you, you mentioned Columbia Heights and politics, and you are a man with a lot of plates up in the air spinning. Why get into politics? It's such an acid bath these days. What is it you're hoping to accomplish?
I always wanted to be involved in politics, but as I have gone along in my career, I did become unsure. I mean, you don't have to look around much to see how toxic our dialogue and discourse have gotten, and politics is kind of a direct manifestation of some of the worst aspects of that. I just got to a point where I felt like so much of what I was seeing in the political experience I was having when interacting with folks or trying to advocate for things here in DC was not solutions focused. And it was not listening. You know, I've talked about over the course of our conversation about some of my core values. One of them is, like I said, listening and empathy. And I'm just sitting here thinking, watching some of the things that were happening in the neighborhood I live in and in the city more broadly. And I was saying, who was advocating for this? And I'd attend a meeting and I'd say, how is this representative of the people in this neighborhood? It's really just a few loud voices. And how is it? One of the things that really got me is I'm over here saying every day, how can I build a platform that has millions of users and regularly monitor the feedback that they're providing, check in on them on how happy they are with the product, and then use that to actually improve what I'm working on and shape solutions that make the product work better for them. But you're over here with just thousands, only thousands of constituents, and you can't seem to set up systems to listen to them. You can't find some way to hear voices beyond the people who have the time and the level of anger necessary for them to join the most boring meetings ever organized in the history of the planet. And that really spurred me to say, let me just dip my toes in and see if I can actually make a difference. And over the past 6 months, I do feel like I've brought a different perspective to some of those conversations. I also think it helps that it's not my end all be all. I am trying to have an impact wherever I can. So if I lose office, I still have the message I'm trying to get out to help people through my book. I still have the work I'm doing in the ESG space. I still have my angel investing that I'm doing to support entrepreneurs of color. And I have my job. So can I come in? My attitude has been, can I come in and create better tools for listening? Some of the things I've seen in technology. So I've set up microsites where people in my community have been going to see transparently, oh, I told Brandolon about a pothole. Where did that go? Who's working on that? And all I have to do is log in and leave a record, share that with the community, the kind of thing I do every day in my job, but instead, without the right tools, can take hours and hours and hours. I've been working to roll those out to other elected officials in the city. And I'm now part of a group that's starting a caucus here in DC to just bring some better tools, almost the tools of product management and the tools of listening into public policy and into politics, so that we can have conversations that are focused on what are we hearing, what are ways that we can address that and make it better, rather than just kind of yelling at each other. So that's why I got involved. And I do think I have, based on the past 6 months, I mean, who knows how things will go. I'm up for re-election in November of this year, because I came in halfway through a term. So who knows whether others think so. I'm trying to gather that information, but that's what motivated me to get involved. And I think for me, there's a broader issue that I've noticed as I've gotten involved, which is that the disconnect between American industry and ordinary American people. When we think about the practices of, say, Ford Motors in the early part of the 20th century, they were doing things to make their business more efficient, like like the supply line or the assembly line. But if you think about other parts of our society, for example, Chipotle uses an assembly line. If you ever go to a soup kitchen, they use an assembly line. That came from corporate America. There was a closer connection. But now when I look at the work I was doing at Salesforce, or the work I do now at Deed, a lot of the things that we use in corporate America to make our work more efficient, to make it more responsive, are not trickling down in productive ways to other people. We're not spreading the word about the tools that we use so that others can take them and adapt them for other use cases, including in charity, in philanthropy, and in public policy, just making the act of making our world a better place. So that's something that being in office is allowing me to learn more about, because it's an instinct that I started to have maybe 2 years ago. And I'm now talking with a variety of different organizations, including Johns Hopkins, about creating initiatives that, for example, pair up product managers with people who understand problems in a community and having them work together with groups that are like a Silicon Valley style Scrum team of people in the community to actually try to solve problems, so that we're focused on problem solving, again, rather than just yelling. So those are the things that I found compelling about it.
It's so interesting to me that you say that. I think there are an awful lot of people over decades now who've had technological hacks to civic engagement. But at the end of the day, it's not about technology. It's about empathetic listening.
Yes. Yeah.
Of the people that you're trying to help. You ostensibly are trying to help. I do want to point out we've got about 6 minutes left. Now is the time to get those questions in the chat box if you want to get them answered by Brandolon. You know, I guess maybe to take us out here, I'll have you talk about the work you've done in angel investing. Tell us a little bit about democratized ventures. Like, who are you investing in? What are you investing in, and why?
So the thesis for Democratized Ventures, and it's a vehicle for my angel investing that I launched with the book, and I'm trying to bring others along as well. So the hope is that it evolves into a group of angel investors and later a fund, a VC fund. And the thesis is two parts. The first is that what really drives a successful product at its core is democratization. And it's something that I have noted for years, but when you think about very successful products, even those that were built ethically and some that should have been built with more ethical consideration, they took something that was available only to a few and made it available to many. WhatsApp, I mean, people have been sending encrypted messages for decades. WhatsApp made it so that we can all send encrypted messages. There are super wealthy people who had massive libraries of music and movies. Spotify and Netflix made it so that we all had access to massive libraries of music and movies. There were people who had black cars on demand. Uber made it so that we all could order a personal car. And so there can be products with that at their core, can still be built in a way that does not make the world a better place, but it is a trend that's associated with a lot of successful products. So that is the first investment criteria. The second for me is that I want to invest in entrepreneurs of color who are spotting new problems or thinking about products in different ways because of their perspective, and then building products that democratize a space or democratize an industry or a practice. And finally, I'm doing that for organizations mainly on the East Coast so that I can not just give money, but also be a part of, as an advisor to them, having coffee with them, being able to connect with them so that they can pick my brain about how to build their product team or how to think about their work as it grows and as they scale. So all of that has been, one of the most important missions for me over the past few years. And in large part, that's because of the experience with my mom. I mean, she always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And until the day she died, she was never able to. I remember us making runs on the weekend to go get cookies. And she'd make cookies and we'd go deliver them. She had some contracts with small local businesses, but she never had an investor. She never had anyone to mentor her, to tell her how to start a business, how to run a business. And so that became incredibly important to me. And then with my experience in ESG and corporate responsibility as a consultant, doing the work directly, building products, I also then get an opportunity to work with these businesses to say, how can you make social impact a part of the core of how you do business, just like Salesforce has, just like we're doing at D, just like I've done for other companies. So then I get to be part of conversations that are in line with my values about making impact something that can happen anywhere, something that not just a Salesforce can do, but even the smallest startup. And so that's become really important to me. And so if anyone knows, some of the investments I've made are, for example, a company called Humanitas.ai. They're trying to build a better way of housing data about impact. So you might have seen them in the news. They recently announced a partnership with Giving Tuesday, where they're going to be the data warehouse for Giving Tuesday, data on impacts that people can use to sort through to figure out where they should give. And they're going to use that in a very API-driven platform to support things like giving at point of sale. So you go into a grocery store now, for example, you're checking out, and you'll often see an opportunity to give. But that opportunity is usually like 5 to 15 of the biggest charities in a given country or a given community, Feeding America or Save the Children or United Way. Well, what Humanitas is doing is letting people opt in to say, learn more about me. And then when I go to the grocery store and I'm checking out, that charity is something that's connected to me. It's maybe a smaller charity in my community or some place I've given previously. And so we're making it more likely for people to give with that kind of technology, but also easier. Or another platform, another investment of mine is a company called Vor3D that I've supported as an advisor. And it's this brilliant designer and fashion industry, former fashion executive in New York City. And she wants to build a platform that allows for digital showrooms. She has a history in fashion. And that may be like, oh, digital showrooms. Part of it is like the metaverse. That sounds really stupid, blah, blah, blah. But what's interesting to her is the sustainability piece. To create a fashion business, it requires traveling to different places, checking out different materials. That, of course, has a massive carbon footprint. It also makes it inaccessible for small fashion designers and fashion designers of color who can't afford to do all that travel just to build their product. So if you can build some of that into a digital experience, you can empower and democratize that industry. So those are the kinds of investments I'm looking to make. Right now, I'm making 1 to 2 a year, but I hope for that to grow in the future.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, Brandolon, it has been so inspiring to talk with you today. I am going to plug the book one more time. This would be a great gift for especially a young person in your life because it is so accessible, first-person perspective on dreams deferred. And then, as we know from today's talk, dreams realized. Brandolon, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to jump in real quick and wrap things up over here. First of all, on behalf of our entire AFSOAS board of directors and our entire SOAS alumni community, I just want to thank both of you for being with us today and for your rich and insightful discussion. Really appreciate your time. Also want to thank our AFSOAS board member and secretary, Whitney Purdom, for organizing today's event. My name is Greg Bowie, and I'm the president of the American Friends of SOAS. I'm also a CISD, or Center for International Studies and Diplomacy graduate, like Brandolon. And I just wanted to appeal to all of you today, if you enjoyed today's discussion, please make a donation to support our flagship initiative, which is the AFSOAS John Loello Scholarship Initiative. As a direct tie-in to today's conversation, our intent over the next couple of years is to provide this scholarship specifically for Black American scholars. So over the past few years, actually, there has been an urgent call to decolonize universities, which involves not only re-examining and reinventing curriculums, but also ensuring that academics within our institutions are representative of a global and diverse society. You may not know this, but only 1% of university professors in the UK are Black, which is due to a very broken pipeline, which results in very few Black students from African and Afro-diaspora communities continuing onto postgraduate and PhD studies. So this kind of knowledge, is really important, and these opportunities are very important for us to pass along. And we as an organization wants to do our small part in helping enable that opportunity for one student a year. So if you're interested in making a contribution to this effort, I have included a link in the chat box here, and we have had 7 scholars to date, and hopefully we'll just be, keep going strong here and be able to offer this opportunity to a scholar in the next academic year as well. And lastly, I just want to thank all of you for being with us, for making the time, and also for your interest in this particular discussion. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a really great day.
Thank you.